Coming to America, the Puritans sought religious freedom from the Church of England. It was to be a new America, a city of gold. The Puritans were discontent with the Church of England and sought religious and social reforms. Much of their beliefs stemmed from the writings of John Calvin. John Calvin was pivotal in the Christian revolt in England. The Puritans believed the Bible was God's true law and provided a tangible plan. They viewed God as monastic, with his influence confined to church authority, because they were vessels of God. Between 1640 to 1700, over 100,000 Puritans arrived in America. Their religion emphasized redemptive piety and conversion, which was the rejection of being part of the world. They sought to teach redemptive powers to transcend their fallen state. The Puritans believed in predestination, meaning that God had already chosen which people would reside in heaven with him, while others were doomed to hell. The Puritans were God's chosen people. Therefore, Satan was a very powerful force because he was constantly tempting them. Their educational practices centered on the Bible as a means to keep children pure. The Puritans did succeed in establishing successful communities in America, but their isolation from the surrounding natural environment led to superstitious beliefs. They believed nature was evil and Satan was in control of nature. Furthermore, many of them believed in spectral evidence, which is basically shape-shifting. Spectral evidence was admitted into court, as they believed many people could change shapes either into animals or other people, all under the command of the devil. Cotton Mather once called nature the devil's territory. Furthermore, the Puritans in America believed the Native Americans were savage animals. The Indians were a part of nature and separate from them. After some of the members, mostly women, ran off from the town to live among the indigenous people, William Bradford stated that their life would fall into great licentiousness and lead to a desolate life, a life without God. The Salem witch trials took place between 1692 and 1693 in Salem, Massachusetts. Although not the only trials of accused witches in America, the period represents one of the darkest periods of time in American history. Some historians have suggested that the trials started when a slave, a young girl, and an old woman were arrested after attempting to tell their fortunes. The event spiraled out of control, and 185 people were accused of witchcraft in Salem. Of that group, 57 women and 7 men were tried. 26 women and 5 men were convicted, and 14 women and 5 men were executed. Most of the people arrested were older women. Many of those persecuted were outspoken women, which went against patriarchal ordinances imposed upon them. Clearly, being outspoken, especially as a woman, did not fit within the rigid structure of society at the time. Furthermore, witch hysteria had been taking place in Europe for centuries, and one may see the influences on the American Puritans as they were under British rule at the time. Some of the ministers at the time fanned the flames of witchcraft, such as Cotton Mather. Many of his sermons and written works revolve around his perception that Satan was alive in Salem and he must be done away with.
In front of St. Peter's Episcopal Church, which was established in 1733. Philip English was a member of this church and built it himself. He was later accused of witchcraft and he fled to New York. Hawthorne was born here in Salem, Massachusetts. And one of the most famous houses here is the House of the Seven Gables, which his cousin lived in and influenced his novel by the same title.
Nathaniel Hawthorne was born on July 4th, 1804. His ancestors were Puritans, and his great-grandfather, John Haythorne, convicted many in the Salem witch trials. Speculation is that Hawthorne added a W to his name as a result of the guilt that followed him regarding his ancestors' deeds his entire life. The witch trials serve as a basis for many of his stories. Examples are Young Goodman Brown and the Tales from Mosses of an Old Manse and the Scarlet Letter. Hawthorne attended college with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and future President Franklin Pierce. He actually later wrote a biography of Pierce's life. His first work was Fanshawe, which was released in 1828. His writing was not lucrative financially, so he worked in the Salem Custom House along with author Herman Melville. Around this time, Hawthorne moved into the transcendental community of Brook Farm, which was founded by George Ripley. However, Hawthorne found that the work required of him was greater than the time he had to write and left the commune. He also had philosophical differences with the Transcendentalists at this point, which influenced his satire of the movement captured in the Blithedale Romance. Hawthorne had strong ties with the Transcendentalists, and in 1842 Hawthorne married painter and fellow Transcendentalist Sophia Peabody, with whom he had 3 children, daughters Una, Rose, and Julian. The couple settled in the Old Manse in Concord, Massachusetts. I'm standing in front of the Old Manse, which was built by Ralph Waldo Emerson's father, Reverend William Emerson, famous Unitarian minister. After Emerson's father's death in 1776, the house came up for rent. It was rented by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Influenced by his puritanical background, many of Hawthorne's tales are allegories that deal with the issues of morals and dark psychological underpinnings. The blackness of the walls of the House of Seven Gables suits his Gothic writing style perfectly. The house was moved here in 1958, but it was actually built in 1750 on Union Street. It was moved by Abbott Lowell Cummings, a famous historian and conservationist, and it's an example of actually poor Georgian architecture. In 1852, Hawthorne bought the Wayside House previously lived in by Bronson Alcott and his family. There he wrote the Blithedale Romance. After returning from traveling around the world as U.S. Consul, Hawthorne built the additional second-story office he called his Sky Parlor. Hawthorne died May 19, 1864, and is buried amongst the transcendental authors he considered his friends. Transcendentalism has a wide range of definitions. It was a revolutionary movement concerning the state of intellectualism at the time. The movement came about as a revolt against the rigid confines of religion. The Transcendentalists focused on creating new forms of thought within religious, political, philosophical, and literary work. Of key note, the main focus of the Transcendentalist works was the idea of spiritually transcending one's own experiences as an individual and connecting with mysterious and divine principles that are around us every day, specifically in nature. Ralph Waldo Emerson is considered to be the father of the Transcendental movement. Emerson was born in 1803 to a Unitarian minister. His father died when he was 8. Following the event, Emerson lost 3 brothers, his first wife, and his oldest son. He was also influenced by his puritanical aunt, Mary Moody Emerson. Her death, along with the others, had a profound impact on Emerson's thinking and contributed to shaping his ideology. Emerson attended Harvard Divinity School and became a minister in 1829, but resigned after his wife's death from tuberculosis. He was troubled by many of the theological doctrines ingrained in Orthodox religion. Along with George Ripley and Bronson Alcott, Emerson created The Dial, a transcendental magazine of which Margaret Fuller was the editor. Many of his most noted essays were published in The Dial. Emerson was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and moved here with his father, William Emerson. Emerson joined the Unitarian Church and became a minister of Harvard. But eventually, his ideas of spirituality broke away from the church, and he began to found the Transcendentalist movement. and in 1836 he published the first Transcendentalist movement book entitled Nature. Emerson published Nature anonymously. The work contains many principles that Emerson would return to in his following essays and speeches. He founded the Transcendentalist movement as a way to free people from the bonds of organized religion and form a transcendental way to find one's own spirit, the divine, and no longer be a slave to habit. His argument was that God was not separate from nature, science, or the individual. In nature, the term is defined as the oversoul. In the text, nature itself becomes the connecting force between the individual and what lies beyond. His famous transparent eyeball passage illustrated his belief that we all can find a deeper truth through nature. He states that he feels the currents of universal being circulate through me. The work is important in the fact that it calls for a direct connection with nature, very much a religious or spiritual connection. Obviously, the work itself had much influence on Henry David Thoreau and his attempt to independently live off of the land. Emerson extends the notion that through nature one may find the universal soul. He suggests that each of us attempt to live as our pure ideas deem we should. The strengths of Emerson's work are his revolutionary and metaphorical interpretations of nature, the divine, and what is inside the individual. By joining the three, Emerson creates a truly individualized and non-traditional religion. The religion is made up of all people's individual interpretations of what is real for them. He became quite famous during his life, delivering up to 80 speeches in 1 year. He spoke widely against the annexation of Texas and the evils of slavery. Emerson died of pneumonia in 1882. Amos Bronson Alcott is one of the most forgotten and neglected figures in American literature, philosophy, and progressive educational reform. He is perhaps best known as the father of Little Women, primarily because his daughter, Louisa May Alcott, gained such literary fame from her novel, Little Women. Alcott was a member of the New School in philosophy, literature, and religion, as were most of the Transcendentalists. He formed many schools over the years, most with little success, and in 1835 he set up the Temple School, a progressive school for human culture, along with his philosophical school, Concord School of Philosophy. Alcott's educational experiment was based on variations in transcendental philosophy and available to both male and female students. Alcott was attempting to let his students create their own understanding of the figure of Jesus, which he would later publish the interviews in his book, Conversations with the Children on the Gospel. Bronson Alcott purchased the Orchard House in 1858. This is the house where Louisa May Alcott wrote the novel Little Women. What Alcott brought to the forefront of his educational practice was an interesting blend of catechistic methods from organized religions, primarily used by the Catholic and Episcopal churches, and the asking of questions in a Socratic method in order to encourage the child to respond with their own moral interpretations of the Bible. Alcott was the founder of the philosophical movement known as personalism, which would later influence the philosophical thoughts of the likes of John Dewey and the pragmatists. Alcott's experiments go hand in hand with transcendental ideas of a new form of religion, democracy, and education that were arguably the most radical and important movements within American history. Furthermore, Alcott was a leader